Okay, so Jim sends in a question that says you have a family member with a home and a horizontal pivot spring in the bottom of the door, very likely the Bommer 7800 series. I know that we're speaking about Bommer. They've been manufacturing that hardware for several decades, like pre-World War II, most certainly. And that your family member recently had tile installed in the kitchen, and we need to trim the bottom of the door because the tile is higher than the previous floor. So what, according to our telephone conversation, it sounds like your floor people basically brought tile up to the bottom mounting plate of the double acting pivot, okay, and rendered the door probably not working very well. The door, I would imagine, the door kind of opens a little bit, and that the gap underneath the door, which per the template is, I believe, about 9/16. Maybe the door doesn't fully open anymore. Maybe it hits the floor or something. But the bottom line is, your question is, what do I do? There's obviously a reason that adding that tile, which would be every bit of 3/8, if not ½ inch, is causing the problem. And there's probably, like I said, very little room left over. Your dilemma, you state, is that you have no idea how to remove the door. And could we be so kind to help with instructions as to how to remove the door and then, of course, reinstall the door? As I am writing this, I realize it's not going to be as simple as that. No, not removing the door will be the simple part. Perhaps you can simply trim the top of the door, and when you reinstall the door, mount it on top of the tile. I would prefer to not have to get into the mortising of the bottom of the door. Any suggestions? Okay, so here we go. How to remove the door. Let's just tackle these in order. Let's take a look at the installation instructions for the hardware that you likely have on how to remove the door. Okay, so how to remove the door. The Bommer 7801 is representative of a series of Bommer pivots that are all the same principle, but there are variations on the theme, meaning there are 3 different classifications of this hardware for door weight, basically, for duty rating. Then there are hold open and non-hold open, and then there are adjustable and non-adjustable. It doesn't matter at all which you have. If you want to dive into the catalog cut section, click on the link to the manufacturer's page. It will open the manufacturer's page in our site, and then click product catalog, or whatever it will be called, and then pull that document up and just do a Control F or a find function for 7800, because that is the series of pivot, and you'll be able to get to the catalog page where you can see the different part numbers for the different pivot hardware, just as an aside. So how to remove the door was the first question. Template and installation instructions. Both of the documents are used when working on the material. They both have different information, and you need both to basically make it work. However, how to remove it would be simply stated as in the bottom of the hardware. If we're looking from a plan view, looking down, you have 4 holes. You have 4 preparations here for screws. This would be a elevation view and then a right side view. So how to remove the door is literally removing those fasteners, okay, and tipping the door as you see. You'll need to lift it up slightly and then tip it out. Here's the problem with what your situation is. You have your door, and you have your pivot hardware, and you have your plate. Sorry. And it sounds like they've tiled up to that plate. Rendering your ability to tip it out, as shown here, is not possible. And there is very likely little room left over up at the top of the opening, which should be no more than 1/8 of an inch, for you to lift the door and compress it, meaning push the door hard to the header and then tip it out. So the issue is, if they've literally boxed you in or painted you in a corner, so to speak, I would expect that tipping it out is going to be quite a chore. Frankly, and it's obvious that, you know, the tile should not have been run that way at all, because it renders the hardware abandoned in place. While the Bommer product line has been Bommer has been a company since 1878 or quite thereabouts. And while their hardware is known to last several decades, the material doesn't last an infinite amount of time. So that's been captured in. Now, what needs to happen, in my opinion, is that that piece of tile get removed so that you can remove that piece of tile so you can tip it out. Get that, scooch it out. Now, you got the door out. At that point, you can have them come back and tile through the entire space like it, quite frankly, should be. Now, your concern moving forward was you would prefer not to mortise the bottom of the door. Can you mortise the top of the door? Well, possibly. The bottom line is this. Standard wood door construction, forgive me. Standard wood door construction would tell us this. In a wood door, in a common wood door, you'll have your top rail. You'll have your bottom rail. Okay? The stiles are the vertical members and the rails are the horizontal members. This manufacturer happens to state that their rail is 2 1/4 inch minimum before trim. So when they build this door, there's going to be a minimum of 2 1/4 here. Then they're going to run it through their double-sided tenon saw or their sliding table saw or whatever type of automated machinery that they're going to run in order to trim that. Now, this manufacturer makes architectural grade doors. This specification happens to be a commodity style door. It is a floating particle board with a 9-ply veneer, a 9-ply construction. In economy grade or in other types of door construction, it would be typical that the top rail is possibly less than the bottom rail. The bottom line is, for you to be confident to trim the top rail at all, you would really want to know how much room is there. And I would, before I trimmed it, I would drill a probing hole into the top and try to ascertain how thick that stile was before I concluded that what I was going to be able to do would be to pull the door out and then trim the top of the door by the amount necessary, then remortise the top of the door for the pivot hardware as needed. Which is the top pivot here. Now, the installation for the top pivot is really simple, and it's detailed here. You do that same prep in the header and in the top of the door. So if you could literally get the door out as shown here, slide it out, swing it out, lift it and swing it out, determine how much room, after they complete the tile at the floor, I would measure your finished opening size from the floor currently to your header, have them and record that number, and then have them retile it, record that number, subtract the new dimension from the old dimension, and that would be what I would trim off the top, assuming that you've got the real estate, so to speak, in the top rail of the door to accommodate that. I would then re-prep the top of my door for the top pivot. Very simple. If you discover that you do not have enough meat up there to cut off, then you're going to basically need to prep the bottom of the door accordingly by that same amount. And what you would literally do is just take the prep that's there now and then just kick it all up, which will not be the end of the world, and it won't be particularly difficult. But the bottom line is you will need to remortise the little ear for the bottom of the for the mounting of the bottom pivot hardware, which is shown very poorly in this image right here. And then you're simply going to increase the height of your preparation accordingly. This is just the different document, the instructions versus this is the template versus the instructions. So 9/16, assuming this is a 7800 series, is the magic number for down here. So that could have become for you 7/16, whatever the case might be. So you'll just remortise the bottom. The same logic applies about making sure that you have enough wood to trim that much off. You may not have enough wood, and then you're going to, when you cut that, you'll have nothing left but particle board, or whatever the core of the door is. Or you might be, compromising the integrity of the construction of the door somehow. So determine if you have enough material there to do the work, and if you don't, then you can still cut the door, but then you have to do an operation that we call re-railing the door, which will absolutely get outside of the concept of what we're talking about. But if we lay the door flat, okay, and if we're looking at the bottom of the door, after you cut the door, you would basically take a router and you would route the bottom of the door like this. Leave your veneer, which will be about 1/8 of an inch on both sides. Core all of that out. Remove everything here. You will take a piece of wood. Let's see here now. You will take a piece of wood. You'll glue this in here. You'll put glue here and here in the back and on your, with your finger. You'll apply glue here, the back, down here, and on your wood that you have already cut and planed to the proper size. Packed that in there. You leave it hang a little bit. Wax paper goes over the edge. A block, and then your clamp. And you clamp it all together. You tighten it. Then when you're done, you'll remove your clamp, you'll remove your 2 blocks, you'll pull off your wax paper, you'll take and you'll belt sand that really nice and flat. That's the factory, that is the door distributor's wood shop method of how this would be properly mitigated. So I believe I've given you the approach along with worst case scenario and how to mitigate that worst case scenario. But I expect that you'll have enough real estate there to rework that door. But I would check that before I just cut. Then we also talked about the proper way to go about cutting that, and let's finish this video with that discussion on how to trim your door. Now, as I've said, I've cut lots of doors, thousands of doors, literally. And the way that I do it in the shop, if I'm doing, if I'm not using, substantial equipment, meaning a sliding table saw or CNC routers or whatever the case might be, and I'm doing it like a guy with a skill saw, which I've done many times. The way that I, School of Hard Knocks, learned how to do it, just a quick aside, my mother's family, they're carpenters. They're tradesmen, they're carpenters. And as I was many years ago teaching myself how to machine wood doors, I cut a door. I have no idea what I was doing, but I had to make it smaller. And my uncle walked in and he looked at me and he said, "Hank, didn't you score that before you cut the bottom of that door?" He says, "Look how chipped up it is. That's not the right way to do that." He's like, "Yeah, you got to score that door." And he walked away. Never came back. Didn't tell me how to do it. Just said, you have to score that door. So pre-internet, what do I do now? How do I score the door? And I realized, well, I know what the term score means. And I've realized that the grain of the door, it's first of all, not all, but many doors are just made of plywood on the face. Or even if it's solid wood. Well, that grain is really structured together. And as you cut through with your table saw, you are erupting, tearing, and forcing apart your wood so that literally you are cutting it open like this, or at least cutting it like this, and this part falls off. So you are creating all kinds of damage to the door. So I realize what scoring is. I know what that means. And then it dawns on me, oh, you have to break or score the veneer so that when you cut it, you're not ripping, literally tearing it until it rips or tears. I also looked at the bottom of my door and I realized the cut on the bottom of the door is super clean. Well, why? The saw blade is turning, well, in your perspective, is turning clockwise. So those teeth are hitting the bottom of the door super clean. A triple set, 72, 7 1/4, whatever it is. A very perfect glass-like cut on the bottom. But it's when those teeth are erupting through the top of the doors when you're getting that damage. So all of my doors would always need to be cut down to the same size, which is basically trim it down, 7/8 of an inch. So what I did was I went to the home center and I got myself a piece of 1x1 aluminum angle and I padded the inside of it so that I put it on the bottom of the door. I had a perfect 7/8 dimension that I would then take my utility blade and score that door all the way down. Okay. Then I would set my guide on my door and clamp my guide on. So I put my router, pardon me, I would put my, and a router is no good for doing this. I would put my skill saw, my circular saw, on the door, but the next thing I would do is I would take the depth of the blade and I would tip it up so that my teeth were just touching it. Okay? Two different methods in play here. Scoring it or scoring it with the circular saw. At a very minimum, you would score it with a circular saw. I liked scoring it with the utility blade because I was literally separating the veneer by cutting through it with my utility blade. When I'm scoring it with a circular saw, I still did not get results without any damage. So I didn't prefer that method. So in a utility blade is super cheap. Score that down, or score it by tipping your blade up. And any circular saw is going to have the ability to do this. You do have to be mindful when you're using a circular saw that it's the right orientation, meaning that you are going to be able to cut on the back side of the unit, have your blade facing the bottom of the door or the top of the door, and all your ability to see the blade is here rather than around on the other side. You have to be able to clamp a straight edge to the door and be able to run your circular saw straight. Score it. Then what I would do is I would occasionally touch my blade down and just make sure that where I'm cutting is where my score was. But when you do it enough, you just set that up to be repeat sort of, operations. You've got a tool, it's a fixture made for doing this. That's all it does. It's set up correctly. The dimensions are right. So be sure that you score it. And we had also talked about how if you're going to do this to the top of the door, imagine seeing your door in elevation. Any damage you do to your door, and I'm making it sound more disastrous than it ever could possibly be, because it won't be. Doors are cut with circular blades. You'll certainly want to go through this effort because you're going to see the top of the door every single time. Looking at something at the bottom of the door, not so dreadful. In fact, the first time I was learning how to do it, chipped up some doors and my client delivered the doors to the side. I put wood filler in them and it didn't look horrible. And if you were painting the doors, they would be perfect. And the client was painting the doors. He called me and said, hey, some of these doors are chipped at the bottom. I'm like, yeah, I put wood filler in there. They're perfectly smooth. It's going to be great. He's like, well, we're staining the doors. I'm like, but you ordered paint grade doors. We discussed they were going to be painted. Yep, we did. They changed their mind. So what we did was the client said, you know what, let's do this. Send me some aluminum kick plates. I'll flush them to the bottom of the door. Actually, he says, you donate the aluminum kick plates and you go install them and we won't ask for new doors. Regardless of paint or stain, the doors were still chipped. And while it was repaired so that it was completely smooth, it was not proper at all. And that's how I learned how to properly score and trim a door. And I would like for you to consider doing it that way as well, so that you don't donate kick plates and your time to install them on the bottom of your door. I can't think of anything else to mention about this. I hope that if there's any questions, you'll certainly follow up, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. And please do report back the success of your project. I would love to know how it turned out. Thank you very much. Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. Thank you.